Everybody, and welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I've got a returning guest today. I love having returning guests. It's like we have built on a body of knowledge before, and we get to continue our conversation. And today's guest is Edward Malkowski. We had a fascinating philosophical conversation last time, and I could philosophize and talk about ancient Egypt all day long. It's my number one talking subject. And today's book we're going to talk about, Ancient Egypt, 39,000 BCE. The history, technology, and philosophy of civilization. And what an entrance for today's show. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guests. Hi, Edward. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wow, Edward, we had a great philosophical conversation last time, and we both love it. We both love philosophy, and we both love ancient civilization. And when you philosophize about, the historical context and historical goings on that happens in a time when, we're told these guys were primitive when they weren't, Edward. Everything screams that these guys were not a primitive civilization. There's major question marks about the antiquity as well, and we're going to get into all of that today. I guess tell us the premise of the book, Ancient Egypt, 39,000 BCE, the title, why write the book? What drove you to write that book? Is it a necessity, to explore the concepts?
Well, it's my whole life kind of drove me to write that book, but to be more specific, I started questioning history long ago, because what I was learning in school wasn't matching up so much with a lot of the books I was reading, nor some of the shows, some of the documentary shows on television. So I decided to get my own answers, and I started that around the mid-90s. And came out with a number of books, and this book here, Ancient Egypt 39,000. I actually spent a month in Egypt with Chris Dunn.
Oh, wonderful!
So the book has a lot of my experiences from being in Egypt. Plus, what I really wanted to do with the book, I wanted to try and paint a large picture of the whole mythology and the whole story and the whole history behind ancient Egypt. So in the chapters, I picked out various segments. Each chapter is actually kind of a little essay on a certain section of Egyptology. That way, I could give the reader, a nice big broad view instead of writing, a very detailed book on one little subject. The general readership out there wants to read something more general, where you cover lots of topics and really paint a picture and put all the pieces of the puzzle together. That's really what I was trying to do with it.
Sure. Of course, Chris Dunn wrote a lovely foreword for you on your other book, The Spiritual Technology of Ancient Egypt, and Chris has been on the show several times. Just to remark on Chris and his work around ancient Egypt, and if you've spent a month with him, you'll probably agree, Edward, he's such an influential guy, and I mean influential in the sense that he's an intelligent academic researcher, and he's very, very focused on, he's brought a lot of wealth of information about ancient Egypt, particularly to the measurements of what these guys were able to do and their technology, and he's given us insight that nobody else has, and it's only by talking to this guy, or hanging out with him, in your case, Edward, for a month, it's incredibly sobering. And you couldn't help have your intelligence influenced by this guy.
Right. Well, actually, Chris and I hung out for a number of years.
Wow.
Before we went to Egypt. But yes, Chris definitely has a huge place in history as far as ancient Egypt goes and the research into ancient Egypt. I believe he was the first person to really identify the Great Pyramid and say, this is a device. That's really what it is. Mm. And just that single concept there alone is huge.
Yeah. Funny you say that, Edward, that when Chris said that this thing, I think he said the quote that, he thought it looked and functioned like a machine. He says perhaps it was a machine or a device. Right. And when I heard him say that, I got it. Edward, that, there's so much technology, specifications of measurements and how corridors are aligned and everything else. There's so much technology into this thing. It's over-engineered in a way, Edward.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and to get that level of over-engineering, you have to have a whole cast of characters that are designing, that are putting together, that are building plans and timetables and equipment and whatnot. It's not a simple job that you just, wake up one morning and start throwing it together. There's a whole process. And when the construction, there's a whole process of managing the construction and making each layer of the pyramid like it's supposed to be. For example, there's 3 chambers that are in the Great Pyramid and 2 sets of shafts. Now they built that from the bottom up. They had to cut and put those pieces into place to make the rooms and the passageways as they were laying down each course. That's not easy to do, and to make it look absolutely perfect from the inside and the outside as well is a feat that we would have a hard time doing today.
I think that's what's so alluring about the pyramid. I mean, we could talk about many, many aspects, and we're going to get into a lot of different stuff in the ancient Egyptian civilization.
Well, there's another thing. Spending a month in Egypt, actually being there, it was kind of difficult to sense it on the Giza Plateau because the Giza Plateau is very commercialized.
It's noisy. It's very noisy.
There's hawkers everywhere, people running around. There's the police. But you can get inside the Great Pyramid. Where I really got the feeling at was in Abu Rawash, which is about 5 miles north.
Sure.
There's no one there. You go there with your driver, and you're alone. But when I was there, I could actually sense the energy of those builders, because when you build a structure, you're putting your hands and your mind are creating these structures. So there's a certain energy that's left there, that you can feel. And when I was there, to me, it was just like it was awe-inspiring that these people. The thought that really came to me was humanity has never been primitive, ever.
Funny enough, I did a show with Michael Cremo yesterday, and Michael talks about the deep antiquity of man, and I got into some heavy subjects, and I'm beginning to realize that, Edward. It's like we're highly advanced from word go, and we always have been, and there's nothing really to prove that we haven't. The evidence doesn't stand up. Yes, if you look at a selective piece of evidence that we're told fits that doesn't, yes, then you're going to believe that. But if you look the anomalous evidence, which is a lot of this alternative history and alternative philosophy and alternative science, is really the driving force these days, Edward. It's where all the research is at, and alternative historians like yourself, researchers, Chris Dunn, everybody's kind of coming at this thing with their own angle, providing evidence, building a body, and it's a growing body of people and a growing body of knowledge, and the driving force is now the alternative field, Edward.
Absolutely, and actually, you used the phrase alternative evidence, or not alternative, anomalous evidence. Really thinking about it, evidence is evidence. The only reason we call it anomalous evidence is because
we don't like it.
The people who wrote the history these past 200 or 300 years, they didn't want to believe that or think that way. So really, evidence is just evidence. And the evidence is there. You're absolutely right.
Evidence is evidence. And like you say, you point out, it's a question of belief. If it's just because somebody believes the Darwinian evolution theory, when, it has never been proved, it's still a theory, or anyone believes that Egyptology is 2500 BC, and that's it because a bunch of Egyptologists say so, it's still a question of belief, and it's never been proved either way, Edward. And I think that's the kind of thing we're going to get into now, because we're going to talk about timelines.
That's correct. I mean, actually, to be truthful, the truth of our past can be actually stranger than we even know right now.
Yeah.
And we don't even know it.
The more I look, I'm in my mid-30s now, and I've been going at this thing since I was 15, and I grew up with Hancock and Boval throwing out theories, and even then I was skeptical as a kid, but I took it on board, and I had an open mind, and I'm going at this 20 years, and I'm watching this research grow and grow, and the more I look at it, Edward, the more I realize we're only scratching the surface. We are looking at a fragment of what's left, and we're kind of missing these guys telling us their philosophy direct, but from the fragments that's left, we have such a beautiful insight. And it's scary, because these guys were highly advanced in my eyes. Because we don't know, we've lost this stuff in a way, we've lost it. And that's what scares me, is that civilization can fall, and we can lose this knowledge just like that, at the click of a finger. And, it saddens me in a way. It does sadden me in a way.
Right. It had happened at least once before. And, it can happen again. What really piques my curiosity, you mentioned evolution here a little bit. What really piques my curiosity is that if you go back in Earth history and geology, there have been 5 major extinctions and about 17 minor extinctions in Earth history.
Oh, 17 minor?
Right.
Wow.
And after each of those 5 major extinctions, there was always a big leap forward in evolution. Okay.
Sure.
Moving from one type of world to another type of world, and the last big catastrophe is where we have the dinosaurs going extinct, and the mammals becoming dominant. Well, there was a catastrophe 12,000 years ago that ended Civilization X.
Sure.
And I have to speculate and wonder, was that another boost of evolution in some way?
Sure. Now we're talking
question.
we're talking Civilization X here. Let's grab this by the bull by the horns, as they say. You're talking 39,000 BCE, before the current era, for ancient Egypt. Why the 39,000 BCE date?
That's what the ancient Egyptians, the dynastic Egyptians, said themselves. There's 2 sources that corroborate this. The first one is the Palermo stone, and the second one is the papyrus of Turin, which is housed in a museum in Turin, Italy. Okay, both of those stones say that before the first dynastic pharaoh, Manes, the followers of Horus ruled for 13,000 years, and before that, the gods ruled for 13,000 or 23,000 years. I'm sorry, 23,000 years. So you go backward with those numbers, and you get the actual origin of Egypt, 39,000 BC, as told by the dynastic Egyptians themselves.
Isn't there a king's list, Edward, somewhere?
Those are the king's list. The Palermo stone and the Turin papyrus are the king's lists.
Oh wow! So, and all those kings add up to like such deep antiquity. Then is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Now the traditional Egyptologists say that the followers of Horus, and especially when Egypt was ruled by the gods, they say that's mythical, meaning that it's a fiction and it's kind of made up. But I don't believe that makes any sense at all when you look at it from a historic perspective. People write things down in history to record things.
Sure.
So most of that king's list, which is dynastic, okay, that's all, accurate. Well, why would that be accurate, and what comes before it be not accurate? It really doesn't make any sense.
Wow.
So it all has to be and historic. We have 2 types of evidence that we deal with. Me as a historian, I'm more of a historian than anything else, a historian and philosopher. I don't really specialize in machines or geology or anything like that, or archaeology. I look at the big picture and look at all the evidence. And we have 2 pieces of evidence about the past. We have the actual forensic data, which is, dug up by geologists and archaeologists and anthropologists. Okay, that's actual data that we know of. However, to actually go back there into the past, you have to have documents written by those people that were alive at the time. And I think we have to take their word for it. The historians, in our great antiquity, we must take their word for it as evidence and weigh that against the actual stuff that we find today. That's the only way to get a true sense of what history was. To do that, however, we have to start looking at mythology more seriously, even biblical mythology. From the first 10 chapters of Genesis, those first 10 chapters of Genesis was not specific to the Hebrew people. Okay, when Moses allegedly, if it was Moses, wrote those first 10 chapters, he was telling history as he understood it. And remember, Moses was an Egyptian. Anyway, the point I was getting at is that we have to take these 2 bodies of evidence and put them together. that's when you really start to see history as it is.
It's quite egotistical, isn't it, for the Egyptologists? I mean, I seem to be bashing Egyptologists on the show, but only because that's the road I'm led down. I mean, I've no other choice but to do it. I don't like, to speak disparagingly of professions, but Egyptological is a very specific, very, very specific profession compared to many others. But they seem to profess to know more about the Egyptians than the Egyptians themselves. When you look at the Palermo stone and the Turin papyrus, I mean, the guys were telling us themselves how old they were, and the Egyptologists just seem to ignore this fact.
Right. That's absolutely true. I just finished reading, Robert Bufal has redone his Secret Chambers book.
Oh, sure.
It's coming out here pretty soon. It was an absolute wonderful read. I got one of the preprint copies of it.
Sure.
And he goes into great detail on the political goings on between him and Hancock and Zahi Hawass and the Egyptians and a whole bunch of other people that was involved during the 90s and 2000s.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Everyone has to read that book because it's by my publisher, Two Inner Traditions. Sure. Everyone's got to read that book because it really exposes the politics as they are.
In preparation for that book, I think Robert's been on the show about 14 times talking about the politics and he's still going at it with Zahi Hawass, and there is a lot of politics involved in it. And what I think you quite rightly point out is it exposes the political problems that is going on with Egyptological research. Right. It's politics. It's not Egyptology. It's not proper archaeology. There's too much involved in this stuff. It's not the true science that we're led to believe.
Well, no, I mean, it's not just the Egyptology. It's science in and of itself. Okay, my youngest boy is a physicist out in California.
Wow.
He's working on his PhD in materials, and
beautiful.
I've talked with him about it for hours, and it's the same thing there. I mean, it's just the whole academic department being ultra conservative in their views and not wanting to accept the new evidence and go forward with either history or science.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically, Egypt is really bad about it.
Hey, Edward, I just, this piques my curiosity here now about, I read something the other day, I'm just looking at the diagram again, that the south face of the Khafre pyramid is at a very specific angle, 53.13 degrees, a very unusual angle to be building a pyramid. People think pyramids are 60 degrees or 45 degrees or whatever, but this Khafre's pyramid is 53.13, and on the winter solstice, the sun hits it almost directly. But if you calculate the time when it truly hit the face, because the Earth's tilt changes, if you allow for the tilt to have changed, the time it hit directly was 19,000 years ago, and it's an archaeoastronomy way of dating the exact time that the face, if that's what the design of the pyramid was, and that's the design of the angle.
Right, that's the big problem right there. You just said it. We don't know if the builders of the pyramid actually did that 53 degrees to specify that date. They may have.
It's very close, though. It is very close.
But how would we know? That's the problem. There's no way to know.
And this is the thing, Edward. I mean, there's so much math in the pyramid. I think that's probably why people look towards this. Now, when you look at it's on a scale to the Earth again, 43,200, i.e., and that's to the height and to the width of the height and the base perimeter or something. It's to do with the polar circumference of the Earth and north to and the circumference. The polar circumference and the equatorial circumference is encoded within the pyramid.
Right.
That may be encoded naturally if you're scaling down something inside a sphere, or they might not at least literally have measured the circumference, or they might not literally have measured the polar circumference. But they may have scaled down from observing precession on the spherical heavens of the sky, and as a result it got naturally encoded. I like to think of it in a philosophical sense like that, Edward, that these guys were doing the sacred geometry. They were exploring philosophical principles. Would you lend yourself to that idea?
Yes, I would. Actually, I would really, really love to write a book on that subject just by itself with the Great Pyramid, because I do believe, and it has to be a belief because there's no really way to know, but it is my belief that the evidence supports the notion that the people of Civilization X They knew what was coming. They knew that they were going to be destroyed, and they saw it in the sky. And they built the pyramids, and they aligned them to the stars. And they actually created a hidden message in what they built.
Wow. I actually subscribe to this theory too, Ed. Funny you ask me that, or say that on the show. I had a philosophical discussion with my girlfriend, and she was asking me, why would they encode so much information into the pyramid? And my answer was, because they could, because they wanted to, because by doing that, it's showing high intelligence. If you were to sit down and go, we're going to be wiped out, we're going to lose our civilization, everything's going to fall, we need to leave something like a legacy. You're going to want to, number one, build it in stone so that it will last. Number two, you're going to put so many philosophical, scientific concepts into that one stone monument that you can, to show that you had math, to show that you were there, to show that, by certain angles and certain alignments, there's so much in that pyramid. It's mind-boggling. I mean, we have PhD mathematicians and philosophers still going at this thing today.
Right. That they were actually creating a physical record of their existence. That's what they were doing.
And the thing is, like, we expect that physical record to be, telling us the answers to the meaning of life or whatever, all their science written down, but it's not going to be like that.
No, and it makes sense to me what they did, because, well, let's just pretend it's going to happen today. Okay. The people in our future will probably not understand our language. There's just no way to know. So to be safe about building a record and a message for the future is to make sure that message could be understood without knowing the language.
Well, for me, Edward, don't laugh now for me, but there's only two universal languages. One is mathematics and the other one is love. Correct. And the other one is love. But
that's correct. Absolutely, man.
And you're not going to use love to transcend time. Mathematics would.
No, mathematics will. That's correct.
Okay, let's get into some of the structures that we're talking about: the pyramids, Sphinx Valley temples, Saqqara. This is a civilization that used granite. Granite's incredibly difficult to carve. I can't scream. I'm from an engineering background, Edward. I can't scream about this enough to people. I was in the Serapeum, and Chris had coached me the last time. Chris Dunn, I had him on the show, and he knew I was going, and I talked to him and collaborated a little bit. He told me what to look for. I cannot get over the Serapeum. I just cannot talk about this enough. These guys were shifting 100-ton granite slabs, carving boxes with laser precision, and I mean space-age precision, mirror flat surfaces, in granite, like incredibly hard surfaces. This stuff is mind-boggling. This guy's had to have a massive technology to do this, one that we don't understand.
There's no question about it. It's the whole civilization. That this was one of the concepts that really hit me hard when I was over there. Is everywhere I went, I saw granite rubble. Mm-hmm. And behind that granite rubble was limestone framing. So you have to ask yourself the question, and we can ask ourselves the question today, because, we have a civilization here. What kind of civilization builds with limestone and then sides their structures with granite? What kind of a civilization does that? We don't do that.
We don't know.
No, but they did. So just right there, they have to have high technology. And my interesting point that I always bring up is that whenever you find high technology, you're also going to find high philosophy.
For sure. Let's talk about the Sphinx, because again, I've had Robert Schoch on the show many times, and love Robert's work. Robert's involved with the redating of the Sphinx. Dr. Robert Schoch, the famous geologist. Of course, John Anthony West brought this to the forefront. What do you think of Schoch's conclusion? And what do you think of John Anthony West saying, I astronomically think it's another full precession later? That would tie in with the 39,000 BC date, no?
Yes, it would. Yeah. From what I remember correctly, Robert Schoch believes it's minimum 5,000 BC and probably closer to 10,000 BC. And yeah, John says that it goes all the way back to 39,000 BC. That's a question there. I've seen pictures of the Sphinx before it was patched up.
Mm.
And there's such deep erosion and deep cuts on the Sphinx's head that it's just by the way it looks, it could very well be 40,000 years old.
Yeah. I definitely think Shock was conservative, Edward.
Well, you have to remember, he was sticking to guidelines that science had put forth. Mm. And the survey that he did and the data he came up with, he couldn't really go beyond that point. Mm. I'm trying to get into Shock's brain. I don't know that for sure. I'm just trying to put myself in that position as a professor of geology. Yeah. That would be his approach. But you see, it's like I was talking about before. On the one hand, you have history. On the other hand, you have physical data. Yeah. Forensic data. Yeah. You have to look at both of them and say, how does this best fit together?
Even at Shock's most conservative date of 5,000 BC, even at the most extremely conservative, it's nowhere near it negates the Egyptologists.
Right. Yeah. It certainly does. Yeah. I kind of favor that it's even older.
Mm. Do you think it had a lion's head? Do you think it had a lion's head and that it was like sitting on its own before the pyramids and that it's like a really, really deep antiquity?
I think it's really, really deep antiquity. This is my gut feeling because I was there and I looked at it and I walked all around it and everything. I spent a lot of time in my second book, Before the Pharaohs. I spent a lot of time reading Shock's work. And this is a decade ago too. Mm-hmm. Shock's work, and there was a couple other geologists that were involved that also wrote papers on the Sphinx. But after being there and thinking about how much rainwater it would take to make that erosion on the Sphinx enclosure, that's a lot of rain over many, many, many thousands and thousands of years. Mm-hmm. I remember reading one report that was done in Israel about erosion, and the limestone that had eroded there with the rainfall was just very slow. So the rock doesn't erode quickly; it erodes very slow. Mm-hmm. So it could be even 70,000 years old for all we know.
Yeah. We got some really good pioneers as well, doing the alternative research. I mean, the Sphinx is one aspect, as we said. I guess the way I see it is, we're looking at...
Well, while we're on top of the Sphinx, let me interject this. We all know that the ancient Egyptians used animals as symbols to convey natural principles.
Sure.
And they chose the body of the cat with a human head as their most monumental statue. Okay. I always ask the question, why? Why did they do that?
Why the lion then?
Right. Yeah. Why the lion?
Wow.
Well, it took a long time for me to really understand what they were talking about. Their philosophy, they would choose animals to represent natural principles.
Yeah.
For example, Thoth. Everyone knows Thoth. Thoth is the ibis bird. It represents wisdom and writing. Okay. That's what the ibis represents. And why they chose the ibis bird, a stork-like bird, is because the ibis would live in the Nile River along with the crocodiles and actually feed with the crocodiles. Well, you have to be a wise bird to be able to live with crocodiles. This is their thinking on how they get, the ibis to represent wisdom. Okay. With Anubis the jackal, that represents digestion, because the jackal can eat rotten meat, rotten anything, and survive and digest it. So they were using animals to explain natural principles.
Yeah.
What's with the cat? This is where it gets really, really, really crazy about them having high philosophy. Well, Most of the research about what kind of energy the ancient Egyptians were using is mostly revolving around sound. Those of us in this area of study, we all know that the Great Pyramid has resonance to it, and all the pyramids has resonance to it. So they were using sound in some way, shape, or form for their utility. Well, what's interesting about sound is it's a vibration, it's a frequency. Okay? And the foundation of our material existence here is also a vibration and a frequency. This is the basic structure of the quantum world that builds the material world. Okay? Well, the base of the lion, okay, or the base of the statue is a lion. The head is a human being. And so they're putting the head at the base of this big human head, at the base of this great big statue. What are they conveying by that? Well, the number one aspect about a cat that everyone knows about is that a cat purrs. Whenever you hold a cat, it purrs and it vibrates.
Sure.
It's a vibration. Okay. So the ancient Egyptians were looking at the cat as the symbol to convey that life is vibration.
Wow.
And at the head of that life, the pinnacle of evolution, if you want to refer to it like that, is the human species. Therefore, you have reality as it exists being a vibration symbolized by the cat, with the humanity at its pinnacle as the head of the statue.
Wow. Beautiful, Ever. I like that. You know, and they say that the purr as well, scientifically, the purr of a cat can regulate the heartbeat because they sit on top of your chest. If you lie, I noticed I've had kittens and cats, and when you lie sleeping, they'll sit on your chest and they cuddle in for heat, but the purr of a kitten can regulate your heartbeat. They do. Yeah.
I've experienced that myself, and it has a very deep calming effect on you.
Of course, and didn't the Egyptians mummify something like close to 1 million cats or something? They worshipped the cat as a massive deity.
Right.
You know, deeply
right.
respected.
But you know, I want to comment on that too. Why you brought it up? I don't think the Egyptians worshipped cats. I think that's our modern day dogma, going backward in time and saying, well, they did this to cats, they must have worshipped them or something like that. Okay. I have a number of cats, and I've had cats for almost a decade now.
Wow.
And there's something about the cat that helps a person achieve a level of awareness and communication at a very basic level.
Yeah.
And it's to communicate with a cat, you actually have to feel kind of what the cat's feeling.
Yeah, your senses go up.
It's hard to explain.
It is. No, I agree with that. And if you want to compare it to a dog, I mean, yes, you have a bond with a dog, but you don't get that level of learning from a dog. A dog is a bond, and it's a very emotional thing. They're very loving and very loyal, especially Labradors and breeds like that. However, I understand what you're saying, that there's a level of mental interaction or intelligence with a cat, you know, where you understand the senses of the cat, and that the cat's like, it's very, very independent creature, and that it will teach you some things, like, you know, this is me, this is how I survive, this is how I operate, and the senses and everything. It's a totally different interaction. I totally agree with you, Edward.
Right, and that's what I think the ancient Egyptians were doing with the cats, is the ancient Egyptians were a highly advanced spiritual people, and they naturally had cats around them. One, they loved cats because it was a domestic animal, and two, the cats actually lived with them and helped them understand how to communicate in the spiritual world.
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned the acoustics. Of course, Chris, he pointed out the acoustics of the Serapeum when I was there, but I had a chance to get to the Red Pyramid when I was there in February, Edward. You know, these pyramids are acoustic machines, if you want to call them that, or they're acoustic generators. I think you could say, in a scientific sense, that any box or room, whether it's circular, cylindrical, rectangular, octagonal, or whatever, it will produce its own energy field. And sarcophagus, quote sarcophagus are like that, although I don't think the boxes were a sarcophagus. However, any type of box will have that, especially if they're mirror flat finish. Like the room I'm in now will have its own acoustics, but because there's doorways and windows in the room, that affects the acoustics and we don't feel it, and we're desensitized to it. So, but the more you look at these corbel vault ceilings inside these pyramids, and you realize that there's such a deep level of acoustics, and there's been a lot of acoustics research gone into the Great Pyramid, but the Red Pyramid I had a chance to go into as well. And this thing is an acoustic wonder as well. And the more I look at these acoustic monuments, because I look at them as an acoustic monument, as well as an astronomically aligned monument, Edward, these acoustics are very, very highly evolved.
Right. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Exactly.
They had a physics of acoustics that they were using. They were actually using the natural occurring energy in our planet is what they were doing. They were copying Mother Nature and using Mother Nature as a guide in order to create their own energy.
Yeah. The inspiration was Mother Nature. That's what the driving force was for all of this.
Correct.
Wow. For me, the acoustics, like you say, implies a body of knowledge. It implies scientific concepts. It implies high technology. All routes lead to high technology, Edward.
What frustrates me about the whole acoustics, the acoustics in physics, is there's not a lot of work out there to read about it. Yeah. I've searched the internet and I've talked to my son about what's going on in the acoustics of physics, and there's really not much.
Yeah,
no one really cares.
It's limited. Yeah, it's like a limited research. Yeah. I definitely think the ancients were aware of acoustics and they had a scientific concept and understanding of it, and I think they explored it. I definitely think they explored it. And like you say, the research just isn't there yet. I think there's a few people trying to open doors, but it's like you say, there's the people in charge of the Egyptian monuments, they're very, very closed to alternative concepts.
That's unfortunate, but true, yeah.
Tell me about the symbolism. Do you think then that when you look at Jean-Francois Champollion, when he himself said there's something behind the hybrid lifts, do you think that the guys were using the symbolism like you mentioned earlier, so using animal characters to represent some sort of like wisdom and knowledge and some of the characters of the animal? The most known dominant character of that animal would be the philosophy that they're trying to portray.
Right.
But I think a lot of the stuff that the problem with Egyptology is that they're trying to read this like an alphabet. They're trying to read it like it's like it's a lines of text in a book, and it's this. Even I think Francois Champollion, he tried to say, no, there's something else behind these.
Francois was right. There was something else. There was something else behind it, and the pioneer who did the work there is a Frenchman by the name of René Schwaller de Lubitz.
Wow.
He actually lived in Egypt for, I think it's like 10 years, maybe even 15 years. When World War II broke out, or actually not when it broke out, it was like a year before World War II broke out. Schwaller was living in France, and I believe it was Alsace, France, and the whole French people could see the writing on the wall. Hitler's Germany was taking land more and more. They had taken Czechoslovakia, and they had taken Austria, and they were still building their forces. Schwaller took off. Him and his wife took off and left France because they knew it was coming. They knew it was going to be invaded in 1938. And they moved to Luxor, Egypt, which is ancient Thebes. And he lived there for the next 10 to 15 years and studied the temples in Luxor along with an archaeologist friend. And his mission was to crack the philosophical culture of the ancient Egyptians, because they left a world of murals and inscriptions and statues, just a wonderful body of art and architecture. And he thought, just like Champollion, that there's got to be something behind this. It's not just pretty to look at. And Schwaller did his work, and that's where he came up with the conclusion that the ancient Egyptians, philosophically speaking, were highly advanced people, and they understood that man was the cosmos. Okay,
Sure.
that we are spiritual beings, and that the cosmos is a manifestation through our perception.
Schwaller was a genius, wasn't he?
He was.
I mean, and when you talk about multidisciplinary people today, I mean, he was like one of the most multidisciplinary guys I've known. Like, I mean, I don't know of a subject he wasn't into.
No, he was like into everything. He was a hermeticist. He was a mathematician. He was a chemist. He was an archaeologist. He was a historical researcher. He did a little bit of everything. His first book, which is not widely known, is called A Study in Numbers.
Really? I haven't heard of this one ever.
Yeah. Yeah, it was published long before his Egyptian stuff does. I believe the publishing date was 1919 on his Study in Numbers. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in his study of numbers, what he is doing is explaining how numbers themselves create our physical universe. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's playing off of the ideas of Pythagoras, okay, but he's taken that into a whole new area, and he's showing you how everything happens between the numbers 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. Okay, the whole foundation of our lives, of the universe, is duality, opposition.
Yeah.
Okay, and when the all, God, the great consciousness, the great spirit, whatever you want to call that thing, when that entity of absolute undifferentiating consciousness moved to create the other, it was a chain reaction that created everything. Because first you have one represents the all. The actual number 1 represents the all. That's all there is. It's a cosmos of 1, a universe of 1. And when 1 moves and creates another, then you have 2. However, there's a relationship between 2 and 1 that continues on automatically when 2 is created from 1. That's a 3. Okay, that's the third concept, the third thing in your universe. So you have a 3-part universe that is self-creating. I'm making a long story short.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
This is where the whole concept of the Trinity comes from: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. 1, 2, 3. 1 being the all, 2 being the Son, and 3 being the interaction between the all and the Son. Now, when I say Son, I'm not referring to a gender.
Sure.
I'm just referring to an other.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And it's through that model that our entire material universe is built. This is actually kind of easy to see if you look at the periodic chart of elements. You can see that what distinguishes one element from another element is the number of electrons and protons that are bound into the atom. So when you break our reality down, it really is number. Anyway, Schwaller did that in 1919, and it's actually a very brilliant book.
Yeah, I've got a few of Schwaller's books. I don't have them all, but certainly one I want to pick up now. What an awesome guy, and this is like I talk about one of the pioneers in the alternative field, and he was the one that really kickstarted off alternative research in Egypt. He's the starting point for anybody, really, if you want to look at stuff. And
that's correct. He actually, this is going back to when he was there in the 1940s. He actually wrote that he was looking at the Sphinx, and he noticed. I mean, he wasn't really about the Sphinx. He was about other things.
Yeah.
But he looked at the Sphinx and he said, "You know what? This looks like water erosion."
Yeah.
Not wind erosion. He actually said that. Yeah. This is back in 1940 or something like that.
So ahead of his time.
And it took another 3 decades until John Anthony West came across that.
Yeah. By a pure fluke that John Anthony West hit on that. And the thing is, if you look at it, Edward, if you look at Schwaller having the throwaway line in a book, and then the random chance that John Anthony West was, picking this up in a French translation as well, and then realizing its worth. And look what's happened because of that. John Anthony West then contacts Shock, and then Shock kind of gets over there, and then all of a sudden there's this whole blossoming alternative research field. You know?
Yeah, I'm a part of that. You're a part of that. We're all part of that, but there's a bigger picture to it, because that whole alternative research into history is actually a large throng in the paradigm shift that's going on right now.
Yeah. I think the timing was right, as you say. You know, the time is right now. This paradigm shift that we're in. I think, you know what I see about in the last 20 years, Edward. You're looking at this paradigm, and you know you've got all these alternative historians getting together. You got 2012, the whole thing about 2012, and you know people are talking about a shift in consciousness and whatever. But setting the whole thing aside, you know there's been a wealth of people come out with all these alternative theories, and I think the main thing that we can kind of settle on is that we've had a cataclysm. Hancock would probably definitely subscribe to this, but you know I think a lot of people will settle on the fact, whether it was the Ice Age or a comet or whatever, and this is going to bring us back to your book again, the Civilization Next. We've had some sort of a cataclysm on this earth. I'm not sure we know the details yet. We can hypothesize and philosophize about this in a minute, Edward, but I think we've had this cataclysm. It's tampered with our historical account in terms of a flowing nature, and all of a sudden we're thrown back into the Stone Age. And do you think perhaps Civilization X, the 39,000 BC Egyptians, you know, there was a break in the civilization, and then another Egyptian race started up, tried to reenact what the other ones were doing? Or do you think they just fell from grace? Or, you know, do you think that the cataclysm was the break around the Ice Age?
The cataclysm was definitely the break. 12,000 years ago. I've done some of my own research on this. There's a number of theories out there, but the one that lines up the best, the actual physical evidence lines up the best, is that a star in the Vela system 12,000 years ago went type 2 supernova.
Yeah.
And it shot a planetoid-sized ball of plasma. Here we're talking hundreds of millions of degrees in temperature.
Yeah.
Shot this planetary-sized ball of plasma in all directions, and a piece of that came into our solar system and basically ricocheted through our solar system and came really very, very close to Earth. And part of that did break off and impact the Earth in the Great Lakes region. Mm-hmm. Long story short, our Earth was radiated 12,000 years ago, and then we had a flood of debris and asteroids and junk that came along with this type 2 supernova that also impacted Earth.
Wow.
Why the Egyptians made it, and why, this has always been a big question of mine, is why is the North American continent, why was it so pristine in history? Why did it take so long for the population to come to North America as opposed to the Eastern Hemisphere? Well, the answer, or my answer anyway, the one that has convinced me, is that the Great Lakes, and there's evidence to show this, the Great Lakes was ground zero of this catastrophe that befell Earth.
Gotcha.
Okay, it totally destroyed North America. Whereas, it affected other parts of it. It affected the planet as a whole. But it greatly affected North America, and on the other side of the planet, on the other side of the world, where Egypt is and India is, and those areas, they weren't affected that much. Okay, they were affected, but not like we were. So what happened is there were survivors in ancient Egypt. However, if it happened today, if the big one hit today, within a few generations, we would run out of supplies, actually, or even before that. And within 100 or 200 years, maybe 300 years, no one would care about what had happened in the past. They'd be worried about survival.
Sure. That's a very, very valid point you put on, Edward, that, and I've wondered that myself, that America seems to be pretty empty of civilization, and until relatively recent, and that's only because European people came over. Now, yes, there has been stuff there, but, it would make sense. Great Lakes Ground Zero. I like that idea. It certainly explains a lot. Certainly.
Yeah. But it seems to me that even though the technology was lost, and I understand why the technology was lost, because if it happened to us today, our grandsons or great grandsons and daughters, they wouldn't need the technology that we had. Mm. The technology that we have is based upon a very complex economy. Sure. Very complex economy. And, if the big one hits and 80% of the population dies, we're just going to be worried about gathering enough wood to make a fire and enough wood to build a house. There's going to be no gasoline, no cars, no trains, no buses, planes. None of that stuff is going to exist. Same thing as, happened then. The people who survived and went forward, they were unable to carry on their technology because they simply didn't need it. Mm-hmm. Now, what they did need and what they lived by was that philosophy associated with the technology. Here I'm referring to the man cosmos, the anthropocosm. Okay, their use of animals as symbolism to explain their natural philosophy. That did come forward in the survivors, and they passed that down generation after generation. And that's why it made it to dynastic Egypt. That's why it was kind of underground, or not really underground, but really not really. There's no history behind it because there's no history written. It was carried orally until the first dynasty. And then, basically the survivors, the dynastic Egyptians, they restarted their civilization that once was.
Wow. And then the only start they had was an oral history there wasn't a pure gap is what you're saying. There was an oral history still carried on as a basic core.
Right. Wow. And that's their mythology. And if you start reading their mythology, actually, if you start really reading all mythology, if you start reading Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Sumerian mythology, even Native American Indian mythology, okay, you can start to put together a picture of this great catastrophe and what happened to us and who survived. I would love to write a book about Native American stories about
mythology.
About mythology and the catastrophe. There's one I do remember. It's a Native American myth where it talks about the animal tent and how all these animals went into the tent in a very large size, but they came out the other side in a very small size. Okay, here they're referring to extinction. Okay, we still have the beaver, but the giant beaver of, 20,000 years ago is gone. All right, we still have the mountain lion, but the saber-toothed tiger of 20,000 years ago is gone. Anyway, that mythology tells me that there were people alive and survived the catastrophe, and they remembered what happened, and they passed down the history orally.
Wow. Wow, fascinating talking to you, Edward. We've got to the top of the hour. I've got one more question to squeeze in. When you're talking about the cataclysm, you have a description of the carbon-14 anomaly. If you could explain that for us.
The carbon-14 anomaly, referring to the catastrophe, yes. How it all started, for the longest time, no one knew what happened 12,000 years ago. The way history and science, geology approaches it is they said, well, we had this change in climate, and then the ice age ended. The earth got warmer, and that's what happened. They really didn't know anything. But some archaeologists were working in the northeastern part of the United States, and they were uncovering mammoth and mastodon bones, and they were doing their radio-14 carbon dating on it, and they were coming up with some crazy dates way too new to be valid, because it's an archaeological fact that the mammoth went extinct like 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago. There are no mammoths today. There hasn't been any in any memory of current humanity. So they started looking around, and they noticed that as you move west of this area, as you move west of the area, the carbon dates for the bones and the tusks started to become normal, as they should be. So they started thinking about, what would cause this crazy carbon-14 dating in this northeastern area of the United States. And, the only thing they can come up with is that an atomic bomb, a very large atomic bomb, exploded that would create the differential in the carbon in the atmosphere to make these tungsten bones look like that. Well, that's not possible. No one had any atomic weapons that we know of back then. So it had to be an extraterrestrial phenomenon, like a gamma ray burst from a star blowing up. I mean, there's physical evidence to prove that. And that was a huge hit. And now we have Göbekli Tepe, which we know, I mean, it's a fact it was built 10,000 BC. And I think Dr. Schock mentioned that to him, it looked like it was buried on purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
As if they were anticipating this coming catastrophe.
Yeah, I'm fully convinced of that myself, Edward. They buried it knowing, they decommissioned it, buried it and to protect it, Right.
They created a record.
Yeah, they created a record.
They wanted it to survive.
For sure. Edward, what a fascinating conversation. I was so excited today. I've been preparing all day, waiting for the philosophical discussion of ancient Egypt. I love the subject. I love the subject matter. You're an awesome guy. The name of the book is Ancient Egypt, 39,000 BCE, The History, Technology and Philosophy of Civilization X. And I think we did it some justice today, Edward. Of course, you don't forget, you can catch you on Amazon for the book, and you have another book, The Spiritual Technology of Ancient Egypt, Sacred Science and the Mystery of Consciousness. Check that one out too. Great subjects to be tackling, Edward. Not enough people doing this or looking into this, and I know you look at the philosophy of it in a modern sense, and I could talk all day about this stuff. I really could. I love the subject matter myself, and it's something that people just kind of ignore or wrestle with, and it's something you've took on head on. So I commend you on that. But thank you for your time today, Edward. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks you, James. It's my pleasure too.